What you see here is a map made by Natsu Miyano, a Japanese national. She hasn't been online for a while, but she made this map based on ancient Chinese and Korean records about trade between the ancient kingdoms of Korea and the early country called Yamato, or as we call during the time of its foundation, Yamatai. She also used some Japanese sources, but at the time, the sources were written in Chinese. And what you can see here is that there were trade routes, between the two areas. One of the Chinese sources even describes the black teeth people, and there is an indigenous group indeed in the Pacific that are called the black teeth people. That's around here, around what today call the Marshall Islands. In the past, used to call them with different names. So, why am I showing this? It is because this Natsu, she showed interest in her ancestry and where her nation, her people, the Japanese, really came from. Because, for those who aren't aware of it, there's quite a controversy about the origins of Japan. Well, the truth is out there. If you look for it, you'll find it, but both Koreans and Japanese in general don't want to put their finger on it. When you read, for example, the records of the first emperors of Japan, most of them are legendary tales in which you can't really make out what really happened. It's only after the foundation of Nippon, when Yamato turned into Nippon, or what they call Japan, it's only from then that you really have chronicles of emperors that truly ruled. Why is that? When you look at the bigger picture, the kingdom of Baekje collapsed. And shortly after the kingdom of Baekje collapsed, you had the empire Nippon that was established. That's not a coincidence. Why is it that when one regional power collapsed, the other suddenly emerged? That's not a coincidence. There are no such things as coincidences. And when you go through the literature and also when you look at the context of those times, you'll find out that there were a lot of investments from the ancient kingdom of Baekje into Yamato. There are even scholars from Japan and Korea that admitted this, and some even identified two of the legendary emperors as Korean princes that ruled in Yamato before they became king in Baekje. Baekje in Japanese Kadura. And it's even known that some of the Japanese clans that later remained for centuries originated from Baekje. The reason I'm showing this is because I'm using this to motivate you. You put in the effort to design this. Well, not to design, really to make it. It's Google, it's not Google Maps, but it's Google My Maps it's called, so it's not very perfect, but at least it gives you a picture of what the ancient situation was. And one more thing that I want to highlight is many of those highways you see today are based on ancient roads that were there. There were ancient roads throughout this region for trade. So for example, you had this road over here that went from the economic center of Yamato towards this dune area, and from there there was commerce going all the way over here towards the kingdom of Shilla. So it was the kingdom of Shilla in ancient times. I'm not telling you to go into Japanese or Korean history. I'm telling you to unlearn this idea that history is completely irrelevant. A lot of folks have this mentality, history doesn't matter. Well, the pagan rulers of this world, they disagree with you. They know that history matters a lot. And they know that the best way to preserve satanic patterns is to hide the origins of it. Well, I explained in another video the truth about Japan, how Japan came into being as a nation. I'm not going to repeat the date of that video. Please watch that video when you have time. But when you look at the origins of Japan, it was founded in blood sacrifice, paganism, witchcraft, and it's a pattern that's been established over this region. And after the fall of Baekje, when the royal house from this former kingdom moved over here and they renewed the system into Nippon, which means the land of the rising sun. The sun is Apollo because they worship the beast. After that, that Korean royal family, which now became the imperial family of Nippon, because they don't call it Yamato anymore, they call it Nippon, the imperial house enforced this satanic pattern generation after generation. There was some disturbance in the 19th century during the modernization of Japan, but even then they preserved their ancient patterns. And the best way to preserve your ancient pattern is to cover it up. That's why you'll seldom encounter a Japanese scholar that will tell you that the Japanese imperial household is the royal household from Baekje that moved to Yamato after the fall of Baekje. You'll seldom find someone that will tell you this, even though even the current Japanese emperor, who has abdicated, admitted that he's from Korean heritage. He's from Korean descent. Or ancestry. I don't know how to say this exactly in English, but you get what I'm saying. He has a Korean ancestry. Yet, though to nationalism, many Japanese won't acknowledge this, because if you have to acknowledge this, then you need to ask some questions, and folks don't want to do that. Also in Korea, they don't really talk about it. Now, one thing I want to add in this video. When you have something that's covered and people want to touch on it, it is because there's something else they're preserving. For example, it can be that you have a slave population that worked very hard in a region. And after the slavery was abolished, they moved on in the country of their captivity. But much of the wealth that was robbed from their ancestors were now kept in the economy of their host country. And the host country only became wealthy though the wealth was stolen from their ancestors of the slaves. But in the education system, they barely talk about it. They pretend as if those people were just savages that were wild and the Europeans came and kidnapped them. And now their education, affecting reading and write, is taught to the Europeans, so they just need to make the best of it and forget about slavery. No mention at all of all the silver, gold, all the books, all the materials that have been robbed from their ancestors. Because once this comes to the light, then the descendants are going to ask, "Wait a minute. You guys told us forget about what happened to our ancestors. And of course we can't change back time, we understand that, but why haven't you ever told us about all the wealth our ancestors had? So we are struggling with 9-to-5 jobs today, while in your economy you have invested the wealth of our ancestors without even telling us?" And that is why there are some movements today that try to convince the masses, especially black folks, that slavery never happened. Even though it's impossible to convince the masses of this because the evidence is overwhelming, still they will try to get a small following that believes that slavery never happened. Why? Because once the true facts come to the light, a lot of people are going to be very angry and people are going to demand answers. And those answers aren't going to be there. So there are people, including black folks, who are invested in this current Apollonistic system, and they just want to be left alone, so they want other blacks to join them in being left alone. So confronting the past in order to process the past the correct way, that will disturb them wanting to be left alone. So they become agents in spreading this deception that slavery never happened. So history is relevant. Not because you live in those former times, but for understanding and for you to process things. Because the language you speak comes from your ancestors. Okay? Where you live now is a result of your ancestors. Not much is thanks to you. Much of it is due to the environment that you inherited from your ancestors. So if your ancestors operated in traumas, then most likely they transferred it onto you. If your ancestors were involved in paranormal things in a deep way, then that will have an effect on you too. You need to be delivered from that. So it's time to cut this BS that history is not relevant. It is relevant. However, you ought to process it in a Christ-centered manner. If history is totally irrelevant, then why do we have the Old and New Testament? Why? Because it's not irrelevant. What can be irrelevant is when folks want to debate without looking for solutions. But that doesn't mean that history itself is irrelevant. Well, that's it for now. Keep agreeing with Christ and be at peace.